You kind of have to keep that to yourself because it's a delicate emotion that you spill out. Someone will kill it there. Therefore, it's best to keep everything within. Imagine this. Bob Dylan, who is now 84 and renowned for being mute on most topics, suddenly chooses to speak as the sun sets over Malibu's tangled coast. But it's not about trophies or politics. No, it's personal today. Dylan is opening the vault on Paul Simon, who was once his shadow, rival, equal, and resentful mirror for the first time in decades. This wasn't merely a casual remark or a mysterious line. Dylan's disclosure, which revealed a cold conflict between two of the most complicated artists in American music history, was like removing decades' worth of dust from an old wound. Jealousy, charges of creative theft, love triangles, and unresolved resentment that had long been hidden beneath courteous interviews and public smiles were hidden behind the harmonies and guitar strings. It's startling to fans. However, to those who were closely observing, it was unavoidable. Consider Greenwich Village at the beginning of the year 1960. Coffee shops filled with optimistic teenagers huddled shoulder to shoulder, denim jackets, and protest music. Bob Dylan was already starting to gain notoriety. Paul Simon then arrived, exact, aspirational, and utterly fixated on songwriting. Simon, however, desired perfection in contrast to Dylan's enigmatic lyrics and rugged rebel persona. He was astute and calculating. He gave off the impression of a man who couldn't tolerate being second best, even at the age of 23. There was conflict behind the scenes from the beginning. Dylan thought Simon's manner was too refined and acceptable to the establishment. Simon, meanwhile, believed Dylan was given too much credit for his flaws. He reportedly allegedly sneered at a pal, folk messiah, more like to a poet who mumbles and has good timing. As Dylan's star climbed more quickly, more wildly, and more mythically, that resentment only grew stronger. Dylan had a revolution, but Paul Simon had the sound of quiet. The scene had been set for a rivalry fueled by pride, jealousy, and silent resentment rather than friendship. Dylan and Paul Simon didn't have the most well-known feud. It was with Art Garfunkel, who had an angelic voice. They were harmony and poetry to the world. A boiling pot of ego, hatred, and control lies behind the veil. Despite penning the lyrics and creating the tunes, Simon always believed that he bore the intellectual burden of the pair, whereas Garfunkel received the praise. Simon silently raged in the background as his golden voice took center stage. It was a seismic breakup in 1970. Fans were unaware of how intimate the breakup went when Garfunkel acted in Catch-22 without telling Simon. It was war, not merely treachery. He was never fully forgiven by Simon. The limited times they spent together were stressful, transactional, and bitter. If the general public's opinion of me was that I was either a sicko or an intoxicated person, their relationship was once compared to frost in the springtime by a close assistant. It's likely that you are aware of Paul Simon's intermittent affair with Carrie Fisher, an actress from Star Wars. Many people are unaware of how emotionally damaging that connection actually was. Their 1983 marriage soon devolved into psychological warfare, obsession, and jealousy. Simon's demand for order and control contrasted with Fisher's struggle with addiction and mental illness. Although they couldn't stay apart, they got divorced in less than a year. Years passed, filled with arguments, passion, and traumatic reunions as the toxic draw persisted. Their tale of love was not poetic. It was disorganized. Friends frequently described their bond as poisonous yet magnetic, like two wires igniting a fire in a pitch-black room. Simon didn't have many supporters in the music industry because of his perfectionism. Producers and session musicians frequently grumbled about his harsh demands and icy manner behind the scenes. He re-recorded individual lines numerous times. He had a reputation for abruptly terminating employees. Working with him might be like walking on shattered glass, according to engineers. Then there were those who were critical. Simon was frequently criticized of being overly analytical, even sterile, whereas Dylan was commended for being honest and unvarnished. His ego took a serious hit when he received mixed reviews for albums like Hearts and Bones. Simon reportedly called a journalist at Late to discuss a 3-star rating after becoming fixated on reviews. Although Paul Simon mostly kept his personal life under wraps, it wasn't quiet. For years, he had a tense relationship with his brother Eddie Simon, who was also a musician. They made an effort to work together on business endeavors, but they constantly argued over financial choices and creative direction. Eddie once compared the situation to two captains attempting to control a single ship while constantly moving in opposing directions. They allegedly went years without speaking to each other personally at one time because their conflicts were so severe. As he grew older, there were also rumors of conflict with his kids. According to reports, Simon's high standards caused a rift, particularly with his kids, who found it difficult to follow in his enormous artistic footsteps. According to insiders, he was a parent who showed his love with rigidity rather than tenderness. He never allowed them to fail. Instead, he pushed them to be the best. There wasn't much room for their individual identities under the shadow of his intellect. Although it ended gently, his first marriage to Peggy Harper left him with emotional wounds. Their son, Harper Simon, also pursued music, although he frequently had to deal with unavoidable comparisons. Interviews suggested a father absorbed by the studio and plagued by his legacy, as well as pressure and emotional absence. Family get-togethers were described as being formal, controlled, and short even after Simon entered semi-retirement. Schedules and practiced small conversation took the place of the camaraderie that was expected during a family meal. Even in private, Simon suffered with vulnerability, according to some close friends. Even during quiet times, one is constantly thinking and editing. Ultimately, the author of some of the 20th century's most sensitive songs struggled to find genuine connection in his own house. In addition to being his haven, the studio served as a means of escape from his intricate, unresolved familial relationships, expectations, and connections. In the 2000s and 2010 seconds, as new musicians emerged, Paul Simon wasn't exactly welcoming to them. He publicly disparaged various contemporary genres, calling out hip-hop for its sampling and calling some current trends meaningless nonsense. Young musicians didn't like this, and Simon became more and more cut off from the changing music business. He publicly argued with artists like Kanye West and even questioned the songwriting abilities of up-and-coming artists like Ed Sheeran. When a speaker at a 2014 music panel hailed contemporary rap as the new poetry, he reportedly rolled his eyes and remarked in private that people had forgotten what true songwriting was. "It's not that I'm against youth," he reportedly said when he declined to attend a music awards ceremony honoring a younger pop act. "I oppose disguised mediocrity." Stories like these proliferated in industrial circles, portraying him as a bitter icon who defied time itself, even though he was never properly cited in public. Ideological as well as musical tensions increased. Simon questioned if contemporary musicians could really grasp the essence of their craft and bemoaned the development of social media-driven fame. In result, younger artists started to view Simon as a gatekeeper who was too haughty to share the torch rather than a hero. The gap between generations grew, even if some people continued to value his accomplishments. A man whose unparalleled legacy now clashed loudly with a cultural transformation he refused to comprehend or accept. Paul Simon had become a lone figure. Paul Simon is still a master of music. However, beneath the praise and timeless tunes is a man tormented by insecurity, fixated on posterity, and damaged by decades of strained bonds and acrimonious rivalries. He was a man who was unable to give up power, his resentment, or his need to be the most intelligent person in the room. Working with him was a combination of amazement and tiredness, according to even his closest associates. He carefully considered each note, questioned each harmony, and frequently made changes to songs after they were completed. The drive to be creatively dominant was not only professional, it was also personal. Simon put up a barrier between himself and other people because of his fixation with perfection. In addition to shielding him from vulnerability, the wall prevented genuine intimacy. His expectations caused friendships to fall apart, relationships to break down, and trust to corrode. Millions of people enjoyed his music, but the guy who created it frequently felt cut off from the world. What many insiders had been whispering for years was only confirmed by Bob Dylan's statements. Despite his brilliance, Paul Simon suffered severe injuries. A man who never experienced genuine affection for his true self. A man whose definition of success was perfection rather than happiness. A man who was more afraid of being irrelevant than of failing. And a man whose most intense disputes were with himself rather than the outside world. Few others were able to touch the legacy that Paul Simon ultimately left behind. His lyrics continue to reverberate over time, and his music is ingrained in contemporary sound. But there was a cost to genius. A friendship was shattered at each standing ovation. A silent feud for every flawless melody. A restless night wondering if it was enough for each hit album. There is more to Simon's tale than just music. It concerns the human cost of perfection, the weight of brilliance, and the pain of pride. And now that Dylan has finally illuminated the darkness hiding beneath that smooth exterior, the world views Paul Simon as more than simply a songwriter, rather as a man who has dedicated his life to finding harmony in a world full of conflict. Even while his career would never die, his path was dirty, lonely, sad, and human. Even though he stood on the biggest stages, he frequently left by himself. Although he worked to create the sounds of generations, he found it difficult to create inner serenity. That could be the paradox of genuine talent. It turns disorder into beauty, but it can't always get rid of the internal turmoil. Additionally, his public life is being curtailed. A man who dedicated his life to his craft and paid for it in sacrifice, grief, and quiet is all that is left, a bittersweet echo. Ultimately, that might be Paul Simon's most eerie tune of